Ladies and gentlemen, the Elbaf arc is finally upon us, and with it comes 1,000 chapters of wacky and wild predictions from the One Piece fandom. So while we're on a little emergency 2-week break because Oda is recovering from his sickness, I figured it'd be fun to put together an Elbaf bingo board. Something to keep handy when all the weekly chapters of Elbaf drop to see if you can predict some of the craziest things the One Piece fandom has been waiting for 1,000 chapters. Now, before we start, let me just preface, these are my predictions that I have accumulated from my own reading and also some opinions online. If you want to make your own and share it in the comments, feel free to do so. And while you're down there, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and let me know if there's any predictions I missed or predictions that you think I absolutely nailed. Also, the order of which these predictions I'm putting in the bingo board is completely random, so maybe you'll get lucky and score bingo after 5 chapters, or maybe you won't get bingo at all, but I'm literally just placing these in random spots to make it fair. First up, we're going to start with a batch of 4 squares, and these are character deaths. There are 4 characters that I think are likely to die in Elbaf, so we're going to throw those on the bingo board. The first and most likely, in my opinion, is Shanks. Everyone has been theorizing that Shanks is going to be prevalent in Elbaf, and a lot of people also think he's going to die in the story. So for that to happen, this arc seems pretty likely according to a lot of One Piece readers. On top of that, we have mention of Shanks in Elbaf already straight from Loki's mouth, so I think it's safe to say he's going to play a pretty major part in this arc. The next most likely death, in my opinion, is Usopp. I know a lot of people think Usopp is going to die this arc because it is the end of his dream, and all the lies Usopp tells come true. He says he's a brave warrior at sea and he's going to die that way, and if he wants that lie to come true, I think the arc that has been set up for him since Little Garden is probably the place where that's going to happen. A lot of readers think it will be the end of Usopp. Personally, I don't really think Oda has it in him to kill a Straw Hat, but if it's going to happen in Elbaf. Next up, we have Loki's death. So far, Loki's hype has been all around his Devil Fruit, and if we want to get that Devil Fruit out of him and into someone else for the final saga of the story, he kind of has to die. A lot of people also think he's being built up as such a strong character to serve as kind of a hype device for a character's return, someone like Shanks or someone like Kid, so I think it's pretty likely he kicks the bucket this arc. And lastly, we have Saul. This is entirely based on his collapse at the end of the most recent chapter. I personally think it would be a little lame for Oda to kind of fake out his death, revive him, and then have him die right after meeting Robin. It almost feels like a waste of reviving him in the first place, but after the last chapter, it seems pretty likely that he will be amongst the character deaths in this arc, so he'll go on the bingo board. Now, as I previously mentioned, a lot of people think this is going to be Shanks' arc, so because of that, our next on the bingo board is Luffy returns the Straw Hat to Shanks. This will be the first time in the series that Luffy and Shanks see each other, apart from when Shanks saw him at Marineford, but Luffy was kind of unconscious, so it doesn't count. Of course, we know according to their promise, the next time they see each other, Luffy will be a great pirate and will return the Straw Hat to Shanks. To be honest, if there's going to be a place in story for this to happen, it has to be before Shanks dies and before the final war starts, because Luffy has to have his iconic Straw Hat for the war and has to get it back from Shanks after he has returned it to Shanks, in my opinion. So I think this is a lock for Elbaf. Another one that I pretty much think is an absolute lock is Blackbeard shows up at Elbaf. We're getting towards the end of the story, and we really need to push that Blackbeard versus Luffy agenda. It's gonna happen soon enough. And also, if we think Shanks is gonna die this arc, it's probably at the hands of Blackbeard. So Blackbeard showing up at Elbaf is so certain that I wouldn't even put it on the bingo board, but we'll put it here anyway. I think it's just gonna happen. Next up, I want to talk about Loki's Devil Fruit. Since we heard that he has some crazy Devil Fruit that's been passed down in the Elbaf Kingdom for years, a lot of people are theorizing what type of Devil Fruit it is. And of course, for as long as I can remember in post-timeskip, every Devil Fruit that is hyped up by Oda is a mythical zone. So Loki's Devil Fruit being a mythical zone is going on the bingo board because I think that is the most likely possibility. I personally would love for this to be something else, give us a little bit of a change of pace after the entire Beast Pirate scenario where they were all zones. But let's be honest, I think Oda's just going to stick to this mythical creature thing. It might even be a god fruit like Luffy's, so that's most likely. Now, speaking of that Devil Fruit, a lot of people think Usopp's power-up in the Elbaf arc is going to be obtaining his Devil Fruit after Loki dies. I'm not sure if this is too possible, so what I'm going to put on the bingo board is just an Usopp power-up. I think this one's also a lock, considering this has been his arc that's been built up for so incredibly long. If Usopp didn't get a power-up in this arc, especially with how his performance in Wano was, I will be severely disappointed. Switching gears a little bit, let's get to some potential character appearances in Elbaf, and there's 3 in specific that I want to talk about. Apart from Blackbeard, who we already mentioned, I think the most possible character reappearance is Kid. I mean, he sank in the seas literally around Elbaf. He has to come back into the story because his character arc is not finished yet. He has a lot of ties to the potential future of the story that could happen in Elbaf, especially with Shanks reoccurring here. I think there's just a really strong chance that he reappears in Elbaf. Next up is Vivi. We know Vivi was signaling the Straw Hats with the X on Luffy's arm in the newspaper because she is with Big News Morgan. We know that something has happened at the Reverie to her now that we've got that flashback in Egghead, so she has to reunite with the Straw Hats for help and to clue them in on what exactly is going on with the larger state of the world. She's also an honorary Straw Hat, so I would imagine this is the arc where she gets to reunite with all of them. And last of the three, a controversial one, is Big Mom. I am not convinced that Big Mom was killed at the end of Wano. I think the hole that she fell down into was the hole where her boat was waiting under the mountains of Wano, and they saved her, contrary to people believing that she is dead. This would just make so much sense because in her flashback she was raised in Elbaf, she is a giant, they all hate her. It would give room for Kid to come back and be a hero in Elbaf because he's the one who defeated her, and it would also give Luffy a chance to have a one-on-one with a Yonko who he absolutely destroys, which we've all been waiting for. So for those reasons, these three characters will go on the bingo board for reoccurring characters. And speaking of those character reappearances, instead of a character reappearing, how about a group? I think the Revolutionaries have a chance to make it to Elbaf in this arc to pick up Bonnie and Kuma. A lot of people think Bonnie is joining the Straw Hats, but Kuma is still here and I just cannot see her leaving her father. And I also think she has way more purpose in the Revolutionaries than the Straw Hats because her main enemy is the Celestial Dragons, whereas the Straw Hats' goal is to find the One Piece. There's a little bit of a separation there, so I would say that the Revolutionaries could possibly show up at Elbaf and pick up those two. And while we're on the topic of Revolutionaries, it's possible that in Elbaf we actually get to see Dragon do something. The man has been staring east for the entire series. We don't have a single glimpse at what his powers could be. I think this might be the arc where we actually get to find out what they are, because he's going to have an opponent in the final saga, and if he just reveals his powers then, it feels a little bit sudden, so I think Elbaf might be the stage for him to actually do something. Now next is something that I thought would happen before the Elbaf arc started, but it did not, so I'm expecting it to happen in the Elbaf arc, because if it doesn't, I'll be a little disappointed, and that is a Straw Hat bounty raise. The events of Egghead Island were absolutely insane. It was the greatest defeat of the Navy that I can remember since Marineford, and if the Straw Hats don't get a bounty raise for that accomplishment, I am lost at Oda's thought process. I could see him maybe waiting till after Elbaf if the events of Elbaf don't really relate to the outside world and the Straw Hats don't get a bounty raise from Elbaf, but I just think that's prolonging the issue for way too long. If the Straw Hats are gonna get a bounty raise from Egghead, I expected it to happen already, so I'm gonna say it's gonna happen in Elbaf. Following that, we have the possibility of a Davy back fight. A lot of people don't know what the purpose of Long Ring Longrand was if it wasn't to have a Davy back fight later on in the story, and I absolutely agree with this. We're also wondering how the Straw Hat Pirates and the Red Hair Pirates are going to have a conflict without killing each other because they're kind of friendly, so I think the Davy back fight method would be a perfect way to pull this off. A lot of people think it's possible that Cross Guild gets involved and they're part of the Davy back fight as well, so we'll include that in here and just put Davy back fight on the bingo board. Speaking of Cross Guild makes a move, is going on the bingo board. I don't think Oda would have these characters team up just to do nothing as the story turns into its final saga. They're going to have a big impact on the flow of the story, and I think Elbaf has to be somewhat relevant for them to get involved in this giant conflict that's brewing. And I also think it's important for Mihawk to get a little bit of a showcase to show us what he can do before he fights Zoro, because if his only fight in the entire series is a loss to Zoro, I think he's kind of a fraud. Another group that I'd bet on making an appearance is the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. We know that Hyruden is a member of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet and Elbaf is his home. We have already seen him this arc, so perhaps some of the other Straw Hat Grand Fleet pull up to Elbaf as a sort of a reunion. We also know at the end of Dressrosa we got a tease that the Straw Hat Grand Fleet would cause a great incident one day. Perhaps that could happen in the Elbaf arc. I know a lot of people think what happened at the Reverie was what the incident was referring to. I could not tell you if that is true or false, but what I can tell you is that I'm expecting them to be in the Elbaf arc. Speaking of great incidents, in Egghead we learn that the water level is rising due to the use of the Mother Flame, and I think it is possible that the Mother Flame gets used again during the span of the Elbaf arc. Imu is relentless, they are trying to eradicate the world. The balance of power is crumbling and Imu is going to become more and more restless, and I think this would add a little bit more haste to the end of the story as the water levels continue to rise, so I think it's possible that the Mother Flame gets used again, perhaps on an important island that we've already been to in the Grand Line, I'm not sure, but it's safe to say that the use of the Mother Flame would propel us even further into the end of the story, so it's going on the bingo board. Something that we also need to propel us into the final stages of the story is the last poneglyph. All we know about the last poneglyph from Blackbeard is that someone on a black boat that creates whirlpools is in possession of it, and they are the man marked by flames. This is very vague, and I am anticipating us to get either more details or the reveal of the last poneglyph itself in the Elbaf arc, considering I can't really think of any other island we're supposed to go to after Elbaf other than Laugh-Tale and the Final War. So you bet we're going to get some kind of details about the last poneglyph or the poneglyph itself inside the Elbaf arc. And because the Straw Hats are getting so close to the One Piece, I think it's time for Oda to start unveiling some of the late-stage villain characters, which is why I think it's possible we get a God's Knights appearance in Elbaf. For Oda to have unveiled this group so late in the story and still not shown us any of their members means they are going to be a serious threat in the later stages of the battle. And I think if there is a place for them to be unveiled, it has to be Elbaf, because like I said, there's not many other places we're going in the story for that to happen. So I think maybe one or two of them get revealed either at Elbaf in a surprise attack, or just in a flashback, or maybe a flash to a different island. Regardless, I'm expecting these characters to be extremely strong and extremely important, so they're going to have to be unveiled sooner than later. And of course, that also means that Imu is going to have to be revealed sooner than later. I know this is a little bit of a stretch, but I am dying to see what Imu looks like, and because Elbaf has so much lore and so much rich history about the world of One Piece, I think it's possible that we finally see what Imu looks like and get a glimpse at their backstory in this arc. I'm not sure if it'll tie into the Elbaf lore or what Saul has to tell us about the Void Century, but with the final villain of the story still being shrouded by a silhouette, it's almost time for us to figure out what the hell is going on over there. Especially after the repeated use of the Mother Flame like I previously mentioned, I think it's finally time we figure out who Imu is. Speaking of the history of Elbaf, I think it is a lock that we're going to get more Sun God or Nika lore in Elbaf. Whether it ties into Joy Boy and who Joy Boy was, or just the mythical creature himself that created the devil fruit that Luffy and Joy Boy possessed. The Sun God has been mentioned by the Giants so many times it would be a waste for no extra lore to happen in this arc, so this easily goes on the bingo board because I think it's going to happen way sooner than we all think. And accompanied with that lore, if it includes Joy Boy, I think we're going to get a hint at what the Conqueror's Haki that he used in Egghead was. When they untied that knot, it was the strongest display of Conqueror's Haki in the entire series that was capable of dispelling the Gorosei from the island, so obviously it is the key to Luffy becoming strong enough to defeat some of these top tier villains in the end of the story. And like I've said so many times already, there is not enough space in the story for Luffy to have an entire training arc after Elbaf. So I think the discovery and the learning of this Conqueror's Haki has to happen in this arc. Not to mention the man with the strongest Conqueror's Haki on the planet, Shanks, is going to take a center stage in this arc in my opinion, so I think everything is going to tie together to see Luffy learning this type of Conqueror's Haki, or just learning how to use a new type of Haki in this arc, so that's going directly on the bingo board. I also think it's possible that the long-awaited God Valley flashback happens in Elbaf. We were teased in Egghead with a small glimpse of the God Valley flashback through the POV of Kuma, but I think there's a lot of implications that we're going to get in the story that come from the other perspectives of the God Valley flashback, and if there's going to be a time for us to learn that, it has to be before the final war. I seriously can't figure out where Rocks fits into the story amongst all this world government and sea rising jargon, but he has to fit somewhere, and if Oda's waited this long to show us what really happened at God Valley, it sure as hell has to be important, so I think there's a slight possibility we get another glimpse at this flashback in Elbaf. And lastly, as the candidates rack up from the last 3 arcs combined, I'm going to guess that the Straw Hats get a new member for the crew in Elbaf. Now, if you ask me personally, I think we're totally full, and I don't really want a new member because that means we have to split the story up for more attention at a newer character in the final war, and I'm not really a fan of that. However, I have to acknowledge that there are so many candidates piling up for a new Straw Hat member since the end of Wano, with Yamato, Bonnie, Lilith, and even potentially some Elbaf character we haven't even met yet. I think it's fair to put a new Straw Hat joining on the bingo board. Whether or not you want to count Vivi for this category, that's up to you. I personally think she already counts as a Straw Hat, and her reappearance in this arc would not count for this square, but if you want to think of it differently, who am I to tell you not to do that? And there is our Elbaf bingo board. Go ahead and leave a comment if you think any of these will not happen, if you think I nailed any of them, or if you have any suggestions that I missed and you think should be on the bingo board instead. I'm going to make an effort to read and reply to all your comments, and while you're down there, make sure to like and subscribe, and feel free to share this bingo board with all of your friends reading weekly One Piece as we jump into the greatest arc that Oda has been teasing us for 1,000 chapters straight. Until next time.